Story 1. The Stranger in the Woods. When I was 12, my family relocated to the countryside of Louisiana. My father's new position led us to trade the energetic suburbs for a more tranquil, unhurried pace of rural existence. Initially, I wasn't pleased. The thought of being distant from my friends and my familiar world made me anxious. However, my parents insisted it would benefit us. A new beginning. Our dwelling was ancient, a two-story timber edifice that groaned with each footfall and moaned when the wind pushed against it. It occupied a sizable tract of land, encircled by dense woodlands extending boundlessly. No other homes were visible, only an endless expanse of trees. Our father mentioned the closest resident was roughly half a mile down the lane. Initially, for several days, all was customary. We unpacked our belongings, established ourselves in our new quarters, and attempted to acclimate to the stillness that enveloped the area like a ponderous shroud. In the evenings, the quiet was nearly intolerable. No far-off drone of cars, no late-night conversations from nearby residents, merely the whisper of the breeze through the foliage and the sporadic groan of the aged house. Yet then peculiar occurrences began. It commenced with our dog, Rusty, a large, amiable golden retriever, whose primary interest had always been affectionate tummy rubs. Subsequent to our relocation, he transformed, becoming anxious, skittish, perpetually he would occupy a spot by the window, gazing into the forest, his ears erect as if straining to hear something. And at night he'd emit protracted, resonant barks that reverberated through the dwelling, rousing every. Initially, my parents assumed Rusty was merely acclimatizing to the novel surroundings, the unfamiliar auditory and olfactory sensations. However, with each passing day, his demeanor deteriorated. He would decline to venture outdoors after dark, his tail clamped between his hind legs, and would snarl at the faintest noise. My father attempted to soothe him, attributing it to forest creatures, but I could discern his growing apprehension as well. Then we encountered Nolan. It was a Saturday forenoon when Nolan appeared. My father and I were outdoors, attending to the perimeter fence of our estate, when we noticed a silhouette nearing from the thoroughfare. Initially, I presumed it was one of the laborers who had assisted with our relocation. But as he drew nearer, I recognized his unfamiliarity. Nolan was an aged individual, likely in his late 50s or early 60s, characterized by thinning gray hair on his crown and a countenance that appeared overexposed to sunlight. He was clad in a time-worn plaid shirt and denim trousers with worn edges, and he moved with a faint gait. However, his eyes captivated me most, a pallid blue verging on gray, and piercing, as if perpetually observant, constantly appraising. "Good day," he uttered, his voice coarse as pebbles. He offered a grin, yet it didn't extend to his gaze. "You must be the recent arrivals." "That's correct," my father responded, wiping perspiration from his forehead. "We just settled in last week. I'm John, and this is my boy." Nolan gave a slight inclination of his head, his look briefly shifting to me before returning to my father. "The name's Nolan. I reside a short distance down the road. Thought I'd drop in to greet you." "Pleasure to meet you," my father stated, offering his hand. Nolan reciprocated the handshake, but there was an unnatural quality to his grasp, too forceful, too swift, as if merely performing a routine action. His eyes rapidly scanned the garden, absorbing every detail, and for an instant, I believed I perceived a fleeting spark of something: interest, inquisitiveness, perhaps even a hint of malevolence. "Are you all adjusting well?" Nolan inquired, his gaze still roving. "Yes, we're making progress," my father replied, feigning a smile. "The house requires some renovations, but it's an agreeable dwelling." Nolan gave another nod, his eyes finally settling on me. "Exercise caution out here. These woodlands can be perilous, particularly for youngsters." There was an undertone in his words that sent a shiver down my spine, but I remained silent, feeling his stare upon me like a tangible burden. My father must have detected my unease, as he swiftly diverted the conversation, querying Nolan about the locality, the residents, an optimal shopping location. Nolan addressed every query, yet his manner of speech held an odd quality. His sentences were truncated, his vocabulary meticulously selected, as if concealing information. After several moments, Nolan bid farewell and hobbled back along the road. My father and I observed his departure, and I felt an undeniable surge of solace once he was no longer visible. However, this respite was fleeting. That night, my father beckoned me, his countenance graver than I had ever witnessed. "You must heed me, my boy," he stated, his tone. "I forbid you from approaching that man. Do you comprehend? Should you encounter him, keep your distance." I furrowed my brow, puzzled. "Why?" He appeared rather amiable. My father shook his head, his jaw clenching. "There's an unsettling quality about him. I cannot articulate it, but I do not confide in him, and I do not wish you to become entangled with him. Do you understand?" I assented, yet the apprehension in my gut intensified. My father was not easily unnerved, and witnessing his profound concern amplified my own worry. That evening, Rusty resumed barking, his cries more vociferous and agitated than before. He was restlessly moving before the window, his ears pressed flat against his skull, snarling at something beyond. I attempted to placate him, but he remained relentless, his gaze fixed on the obscurity beyond the pane. I squinted through the window, yet perceived only trees, swaying in the breeze, their limbs projecting elongated, contorted specters across the ground. Nothing was present, at least nothing discernible to me, but Rusty sensed an entity, and whatever it was, it utterly petrified him. Sleep evaded me that night. Each time I shut my eyes, Nolan's visage appeared, those frigid, appraising eyes gazing back. His voice reverberated in my mind, urging caution, cautioning me about the forest, and with every thought of him, a shiver traversed my spine. Several days subsequently, as I lay in bed attempting to drift into slumber, I perceived it, the unequivocal sound of someone murmuring beyond my window. Initially I believed it to be a figment of my imagination, merely the breeze deceiving me. However, the more I concentrated, the more distinct it grew. Someone was present, just outside my window, articulating my name softly. My heart began to throb in my chest, and a frigid perspiration emerged on my brow. I longed to summon my parents, but I was too terror-stricken to stir, too fearful to utter a sound. Then I heard it once more, my name articulated, in that identical coarse, gravelly tone. I compelled myself to an upright position, my hands quivering as I extended them toward the drapery. Slowly I drew it back just enough to glimpse outside. What confronted my vision chilled me to the bone. Nolan stood in the garden, his face illuminated by the faint moonlight. Yet something was amiss with him. His complexion was pallid, his eyes sunken, and his mouth was contorted into a monstrous leer. He was fixated directly on me, his head inclined as if attempting to decipher my thoughts. I yearned to shriek, yet I was incapable. I stood petrified, my gaze fixed on his, terror incapacitating me. Then abruptly, he was no longer there. I couldn't fathom his swift movement, but in a mere instant, he had disappeared into the gloom, leaving behind only the persistent sensation of foreboding that permeated the atmosphere like dense mist. I leapt from my bed and dashed to my parents' chamber, my heart pounding as I hammered on their entrance. My father unlatched it, his expression muddled with slumber, but upon perceiving my countenance, he awoke rapidly. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice pressed. "Nolan," I articulated haltingly. He was outdoors directly outside my window. My father acted without delay. He retrieved the firearm he stored beneath his bed and swiftly descended the stairs, signaling me to remain near. We inspected every entry point, every casement, but detected no trace of Nolan. The garden was deserted, the forest hushed, yet I was certain of what I had witnessed, and so was my father. The following day my father commenced inquiries, seeking information about Nolan. However, the more he investigated, the more peculiar matters became. Not a single resident in the vicinity recognized Nolan. No documentation existed of an individual named Nolan residing in the locale, nor anyone fitting his portrayal. My father even consulted the municipal police, but they possessed no intelligence regarding him either. It was as if Nolan were non-existent. That evening, my parents had a serious discussion with me, informing me of our impending relocation. They offered no explicit justification, yet I understood it was entirely related to Nolan. The subsequent days passed in a haze of boxing belongings and making arrangements, but I couldn't dispel the sensation of being observed. Each time I gazed through a window, I anticipated perceiving Nolan there, his distorted smirk upon his visage, those vacant eyes fixed on me. The night prior to our departure, I experienced a dreadful dream. I was in my chamber, reclining in bed, when I again heard the faint murmuring. I opened my eyes, and Nolan stood at the foot of my bed, his countenance mere inches from mine. He was softly articulating my name repeatedly, his breath frigid against my skin. I awoke saturated with perspiration, my heart throbbing in my chest. I sat erect, striving to regain my composure, but the terror persisted, gnawing at my core. I remained awake for the remainder of the night. The following dawn, we packed our vehicle and abandoned the residence. As we drove off, I cast one final glance back, half anticipating to behold Nolan standing in the garden, observing our departure. Yet there was naught, merely the deserted dwelling, the hushed woodlands, and the enduring sensation of foreboding that accompanied us to our new abode. My father never spoke of Nolan again, nor did I. We endeavored to relegate the entire ordeal to the past, to continue with our existence. However, I could never erase the memory of those vacant eyes, that contorted smirk, the sound of his voice softly uttering my name. And occasionally, in the depth of night, when the world is still and obscurity encroaches, I can yet perceive him beckoning to me from the gloom.
Story 2. The Sealed Chamber. The purchase of our new residence brought my wife Gianna and me immense elation. It embodied every aspiration we'd ever held. A roomy, two-story dwelling, situated in a serene suburban area, offering ample space to commence a family. Erected in the 1920s, the house boasted a quintessential craftsman aesthetic, featuring expansive verandas and generous windows that permitted an abundance of natural illumination. It possessed distinct personality, elegance, and, as the property agent noted, a solid foundation. From the instant we crossed the threshold, I sensed Gianna's profound affection for it. She immediately articulated her visions for decorating each chamber, designating a play zone for our prospective children, and transforming the attic into a snug reading alcove. My own enthusiasm matched hers, as I already envisioned the various undertakings we could embark upon to truly personalize the home. Our relocation occurred on a mild Saturday morning, a day that imbued everything with potential. As we unpacked, we chuckled over the enormous stack of cartons we had amassed through the years, musing that we would likely still be unboxing them months hence. The dwelling was a labyrinth of chambers and corridors, and it appeared that with every turn, we unearthed something novel. A concealed cupboard, an overlooked storage area, or an idiosyncratic architectural embellishment that enhanced the home's allure. However, there was one element we had yet to uncover, an entryway we hadn't observed during any previous inspections, a door that granted access to a chamber whose existence we were unaware of. Several days following our relocation, we stumbled upon the door. We had dedicated the morning to unpacking containers in the sitting room and chose to pause to investigate the upper floor. We were still familiarizing ourselves with the dwelling's configuration, so we roamed from room to room, contemplating the potential of each area. As we reached the hallway's terminus, I discerned an anomaly. The corridor appeared to stretch beyond my recollection, culminating in a slender, diminutive door at its furthest point. It was sequestered in a recess, nearly obscured by an imposing vintage cabinet left by the former occupant. Had you noticed this previously? I inquired of Gianna, gesturing toward the door. She shook her head, furrowing her brow. No, I have no memory of this whatsoever. Do you suppose it leads to the loft? I conjectured, despite being convinced we had already located the attic's access in another section of the house. Let's investigate. The portal was aged, its paint flaking, the timber marginally warped. It incongruously stood apart from the remainder of the residence, which had been fastidiously preserved. I exerted considerable force to unseal it, the door moaning on its oxidized pivots as it swung inward. The chamber beyond was tiny, almost oppressively so. A substantial stratum of dust blanketed the floor. At its furthest extremity was a lone, slender window, but its filth rendered it virtually impenetrable to light. The air felt stagnant, dense with the odor of mold and a subtle metallic tang, reminiscent of ancient gore. Gianna crinkled her nose upon entering, her hand covering her mouth. "This is peculiar," she softly murmured, her voice subdued. "Why would they seal this area?" I had no reply. The chamber exuded an erroneous sensation, as if it were an alien inclusion within the house. It was frigid, notwithstanding the external warmth of the day, and an aura of immobility caused my skin to tingle. As we surveyed the room, we discovered nothing noteworthy, merely a decrepit fractured chair in one recess, and a small fractured looking glass on the partition. Yet an inherent quality of the space unsettled me, as if we were trespassing upon something that desired no disruption. Gianna shivered, rubbing her forearms and casting a wary glance at the entryway. "Let's depart," she articulated, her voice taut. "I find this place disagreeable." I offered no contention. We exited the chamber, securing the door behind us, and endeavored to dismiss it from our thoughts as we resumed our exploration of the dwelling. However, the recollection of that chilly, dim enclosure persisted in my consciousness, like an unyielding specter. Over the ensuing weeks, we established ourselves in our new abode. Life was prosperous, superior to how it had been in years. Gianna and I passed our evenings preparing meals, viewing films, and envisioning our future. The house embodied a renewed commencement, a locale where we could forge the existence we had perpetually yearned for. However, then the auditory disturbances commenced. It initiated with minor phenomena, a subtle groaning sound in the dead of night, akin to someone traversing the passageway. I attributed it to the dwelling's natural settling, or perhaps a current of air passing through its ancient partitions. Nevertheless, as the days progressed, the sounds grew more regular, more unambiguous. One evening, as I lay in bed, partially asleep, I again detected it, the unmistakable rhythm of slow, purposeful footfalls advancing along the corridor. I opened my eyes, my heart thrumming in my chest, and attended closely. The steps ceased beyond our bedroom door, and I suppressed my breathing, anticipating an event. Yet, only stillness prevailed. The subsequent morning, I brought it up to Gianna, but she merely dismissed it. "Elderly homes generate sounds," she remarked, without averting her gaze from her coffee. "You're simply unaccustomed to it." I yearned to credit her, yet the apprehension within me hinted at a deeper truth. The footfalls had resonated with excessive authenticity, too intentional, as if an entity or something was perambulating through the abode. As the days transpired, the disturbances persisted. Occasionally, I would perceive the groan of doors opening and closing, despite my certainty that we had secured them. At other times, a faint murmuring would reach me, as if someone spoke just beyond audibility, their voice too low to decipher. However, it was the chamber at the hallway's extremity that disturbed me most profoundly. Irrespective of how often I passed it, I couldn't dislodge the sensation that an entity observed me from beyond that door. The pervading feeling of abnormality, which had saturated the chamber upon our initial discovery, had only intensified. Now it appeared to infiltrate the corridor itself, like an insidious, creeping manifestation. Gianna also detected it, though initially she denied it. She would cast apprehensive glances at the door as we went by, her pace accelerating as if she couldn't escape it swiftly enough. And in the evenings, she would nestle beside me in bed, her physique rigid as if attempting to block out the sounds that permeated the house. Yet we refrained from discussing it. We endeavored to feign normalcy, to believe the house was merely ancient and replete with eccentricities. However, the strain between us mounted, propelled by the unspoken apprehension that something was gravely, profoundly amiss. The critical juncture arrived one night, when I roused to discover Gianna, upright in bed, her eyes fixed on the door. Her complexion was pallid, her eyes dilated with terror, and her hands clutched the bedsheets tightly. "Gianna," I murmured, extending my hand to her arm. "What troubles you?" She offered no reply, her stare unwavering on the portal. I traced her line of vision, my heart thumping against my ribs, and then I perceived it, an entity standing just beyond our bedchamber. It was towering and slender, its form veiled in gloom, yet I could distinguish its contour, how it appeared to meld into the specters. The figure remained motionless, emitted no sound. It simply stood, observing. For an instant, I found myself breathless, my thoughts racing to comprehend what I beheld. But despite my utmost effort, I couldn't rationalize it. The figure was not actual. It could not be, yet it was undeniably present, standing in our corridor, as tangible as anything else within the residence. Then, with the same suddenness of its advent, it disappeared. The entity had dematerialized, leaving naught but the dim, vacant corridor in its wake. Gianna exhaled an unsteady breath, her frame quivering as she faced me. "Did you witness that?" she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. I assented, too bewildered to articulate. We did not sleep for the remainder of the night, sitting upright in bed, clinging to one another, our eyes fastened on the portal, awaiting the entity's reappearance. But the dwelling was hushed, the passageway void. The subsequent morning, we resolved that we could no longer reside in the house. Whatever was transpiring transcended our comprehension, beyond anything we could manage. We packed our cases and checked into a lodging. Yet even there the terror pursued us. Every groan, every specter, every faint breath of the wind plunged us into a state of alarm. Our sensibilities frayed and raw. We recognized our inability to return to the residence, yet we were at a loss for alternative action. The following day, I succeeded in locating the family who had sold us the property, an elderly couple who had resided there for more than 3 decades. "The house possesses a past," the husband disclosed, his voice tinged with remorse. "We withheld that information because we deemed it inconsequential. But now," he hesitated, casting a look at his wife, who nodded gravely. "There was a chamber," he proceeded, "a room that was hermetically sealed when we acquired the house. The former proprietor claimed it was merely for storage, yet we never utilized it. We consistently felt an odd sensation about it, as if something were amiss." A shiver coursed down my back. "What transpired?" the wife interjected, her voice quivering. "We encountered peculiar events over the years. Sounds, specters, phenomena inexplicable, but it invariably revolved around that particular chamber. Eventually we barricaded it, hoping to halt the occurrences, and it ceased for a time. But now that it's unsealed once more," the husband's voice faded, his visage grim. I returned to the hotel, my thoughts tumultuous. The room had been hermetically sealed for a purpose, something the preceding proprietors had sought to conceal, something they had wished would remain interred. But now, it was beyond remedy. We had unlatched the portal, and whatever entity resided within that room had been unleashed. We made one final trip to the house. We harbored no desire to, yet recognized its necessity. The dread, the apprehension had entirely enveloped us, and the sole means to quell it was to face whatever inhabited that chamber. The dwelling was hushed upon our arrival, the atmosphere laden with expectancy. We ascended the staircase, our footfalls reverberating in the desolate corridor. The entrance to the enigmatic room stood at its extremity, slightly ajar, as if awaiting us. I paused, my hand quivering as I extended it towards the doorknob. Gianna stood adjacent, her countenance pale but resolute. "We must accomplish this," she whispered, her voice unsteady. I assented, drawing a deep breath, and propelled the door open. The chamber was precisely as we had departed it, diminutive, shadowed, and cold. However, this time, an additional element was present. An aura, a sensation of being scrutinized, as if something observed from just beyond sight. And then we perceived it, the entity occupying the corner, its form scarcely discernible in the faint illumination. It remained static, emitted no sound. It simply stood, its eyes, or what served as eyes, fixed upon us. For an instant, Terror immobilized me, but then an inner resolve ignited. I could not permit this entity to dominate our existence, could not allow it triumph. I advanced, my voice quivering yet firm. "You do not pertain here," I declared, my words echoing in the small chamber. "This is our dwelling, not yours. You must depart." The entity did not react, did not shift, yet I could discern the palpable strain within the chamber, the manner in which the air appeared to congeal, as if offering resistance. Then gradually, the figure commenced to dissipate. It did not vanish instantaneously. Its disappearance was progressive, akin to a specter being effaced by illumination. But as it diminished, the room became warmer, the sensation of foreboding dissipating like a mist, scorched by the sun. Ultimately, the figure was no more. Gianna released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been retaining, her frame slumping with release. I turned to her, drawing her into a close embrace, the terror and apprehension dissolving as we clung to one another. The chamber now stood vacant, merely a diminutive, neglected area within an ancient dwelling. Yet we were certain that whatever had tormented it was absent. We had confronted it, and we had triumphed. Subsequent to that, we remained in the house. It required time to recuperate, to shed the terror that had held us captive for so long. But we achieved it collectively. The enigmatic room persisted, yet it was simply a chamber now, an element of the house's past, but no longer immense. Occasionally when I traverse past it, I still experience a subtle coolness, a memento of our encounter, but it no longer instills apprehension within me. It is merely a segment of our narrative, a chapter in the existence we have constructed, side by side. Regarding the entity, I remain ignorant of its nature, or its purpose for being there. Yet one certainty I possess is that it has departed and will not return. Nevertheless, occasionally in the late hours of the night, when the dwelling is hushed and the air is motionless, I cannot help but ponder what if it was not alone.
Story 3. The Persistent Rocking Chair. Upon taking residence in the aged dwelling on Maple Street, I anticipated nothing extraordinary. It was a modest, single-level structure with flaking paint, yet it exuded a peculiar allure, the kind that suggested I could transform it into something unique. The property had lingered on the market for some time, and I acquired it at a favorable cost. The former occupant had deceased, and their kin were keen to expedite the sale. I refrained from excessive inquiry. It was a pleasant home in an agreeable locale, and I considered it a fortunate acquisition. The initial days were a rapid succession of unpacking and establishing myself. There was an almost soothing quality to the venerable house, as though it had awaited someone to infuse it with vitality once more. Its walls were substantial, and its windows admitted just enough light to render the space inviting, even during the more frigid, darker season. However, a singular detail bothered me from the outset: the main entrance. Each instance I departed the dwelling, I ensured the door was fastened. It was a long-standing custom, a principle my father had instilled in me since childhood. "Always secure the door behind you," he would counsel, "even if you're only stepping out for a moment." Consequently, whenever I exited, I would meticulously verify the latch, confirming its steadfastness prior to my journey. Yet, regardless of my diligence, I would return to discover the door unbarred. The initial occurrence led me to believe I had simply overlooked it. Perhaps I had been preoccupied, focused on the extensive list of tasks I needed to complete. However, it recurred persistently. Each and every return found the door unfastened. Initially, I dismissed it as an aging lock, requiring substitution. But after a week of this, I could no longer disregard it. Something was amiss. One evening, following an arduous day of attending to various tasks, I arrived home with a container of prepared food, prepared to collapse onto the sofa and view some television. As was my routine, I thoroughly inspected the main entrance prior to my departure, ensuring it was firmly secure. Yet, upon my return, the door was marginally open. My spirits plummeted. I remained stationary for an instant, my gaze fixed on the entryway, my thoughts traversing every conceivable scenario. Had an intruder entered?
Was I merely succumbing to paranoia? I nudged the door open, its ancient hinges groaning. The dwelling was hushed, almost excessively so, the kind of stillness that engenders a sense of not being solitary. I stepped inside, depositing the prepared food on the kitchen counter, and conducted a swift inspection of the premises. Everything appeared to be in its proper arrangement. Nothing was absent, nothing displaced. Yet, the air felt altered, more substantial, as if something lingered in the ambiance, just beyond reach. As I prepared to proceed to the living area, I discerned a sound emanating from the cellar. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet sufficient to induce goosebumps, a gentle, repetitive groaning, as of timber abrading against timber. I paused at the summit of the cellar steps, my hands suspended above the illumination switch. I harbored no desire to descend. The basement represented the sole section of the house I hadn't thoroughly investigated. It was chilly and humid, with low overheads and visible conduits that rendered it more akin to a subterranean prison than a storage facility. Nevertheless, the sound endured, and I recognized my inability to dismiss it. I activated the light, and the unadorned bulb diffused a faint, sallow radiance over the staircase. The groaning intensified as I proceeded downward, each movement sending a tremor through me. Upon reaching the base, I beheld it. In the cellar's corner, partially shrouded in gloom, stood a rocking chair. It was antiquated, with peeling enamel and a sunken seat, yet it was undeniably distinct. My heart momentarily faltered as I identified it. It was precisely like a chair I had discarded prior to my relocation. I gazed at it, striving to comprehend what I witnessed. How had it arrived here? Who had introduced it into the dwelling? And why was it swaying ever so gently to and fro? My hands quivered as I extended them to make contact, but the instant my digits grazed the timber, the chair ceased its motion. The cellar became utterly still, the air dense with the scent of mold and something distinct, a saccharine, morbid fragrance, akin to antique perfume. I retreated, my heart throbbing in my chest, and hastened up the steps, slamming the door shut behind me. I did not venture back down that evening. Instead, I secured every door and window, re-verified the fastenings, and attempted to persuade myself that I was being overly dramatic. But intrinsically, I understood something was amiss. That night, slumber eluded me. With each closure of my eyes, I beheld the chair swaying rhythmically in the cellar's corner. I shifted restlessly, the apprehension gnawing at my spirit, until at last I succumbed to an agitated slumber. It must have been the dead of night when I awoke to the distinct sound of groaning. My eyes shot open, and for an instant, I felt disoriented, uncertain of my location. But then I heard it once more, the unequivocal sound of timber abrading against timber, originating from the basement. I assumed an upright position in bed, my heart thumping rapidly. The dwelling was shrouded in darkness, the sole illumination emanating from the moon, filtering through the drapes. The sound was subtle, yet undeniably present, consistent and metrical. I harbored no desire to descend, nor to confront whatever produced that noise, but I recognized I could not disregard it. Not on this occasion. I seized my mobile device, its diminutive display emitting a feeble glow as I proceeded down the corridor. My hand quivered as I reached for the cellar door, every instinct urging me to retreat. Yet I unlatched the portal. The groaning was now more pronounced, reverberating up the steps, each noise causing my heart to cease. I drew a deep breath, attempting to compose myself, and slowly made my way down the staircase. The cellar was frigid, moist, and unnervingly quiet. The chair remained in its corner, precisely where I had previously observed it. However, this time, it was not unoccupied. Seated in the chair was an aged female, her complexion pallid and furrowed, her hair sparse and gray, drawn back into a severe coil. She was attired in a discolored gown that seemed to belong to a bygone epoch, and her hands were composedly rested in her lap. Yet it was her eyes that instilled the greatest terror in me. Opaque, expressionless, fixed straight ahead, as if I were utterly invisible to her. The chair swayed rhythmically, its consistent groaning permeating the atmosphere. She remained unmoving, offering no form of recognition. She simply sat, her stare fixed on an indeterminate point in the distance. I was immobilized, unable to draw breath. I stood petrified, my intellect clamoring for flight, urging me to escape the location. Yet my physical form refused to comply. Then slowly she rotated her head, her eyes fastening onto mine, and a chilling surge of terror enveloped me. Her mouth shifted, her lips parting slightly as though attempting articulation, but no sound emerged. For what seemed an endless duration, we simply gazed at one another, the chair's groaning being the sole sound in the cellar. Then the oscillation ceased. The basement grew still, the air dense with suspense. I blinked, and when my eyes reopened, the chair stood vacant. The elderly woman had vanished. I rushed up the steps, my heart thumping in my chest, and secured the cellar door behind me. I did not return there that evening. Instead, I sat in the sitting room, my thoughts tumultuous, attempting to comprehend the recent events. However, no elucidation existed, no logical method to grasp what I had witnessed. All I ascertained was that the dwelling was no longer uninhabited. The subsequent morning, I was utterly spent, my intellect obscured by apprehension and bewilderment. I realized my inability to remain in the residence, yet I was unsure of my destination. I felt ensnared, as if under surveillance, even in broad daylight. I resolved to conduct some investigation, hoping to uncover some solutions. I commenced with the former proprietor, endeavoring to ascertain more about the individual who had inhabited the dwelling prior to my arrival. It required little time to discover the name. It was explicitly recorded on the deed: Eleanor Martin. She had resided in the house for over 5 decades, a widow who had nurtured her offspring there and remained long after their departure. She had perished within the home, alone, and her children had promptly sold it thereafter. The more I gleaned about her, the more the disparate elements cohered. The rocking chair had belonged to her, a present from her deceased spouse. It had been her cherished locale, where she would recline for hours, engaging in knitting or reading, long after the residence became deserted. I communicated with the former owner's son, hoping he could illuminate the ongoing occurrence. He was initially reluctant to converse, but ultimately he divulged. "My mother adored that chair," he articulated, his voice tinged with melancholy. "She spent the majority of her days in it, even after falling ill. We attempted to dispose of it after her demise, but invariably, it would reappear within the house. We were at a loss, so we simply left it in the cellar." A shiver coursed down my back as he articulated, the fragments of information assembling in my thought. The chair had not been introduced into the residence. It had perpetually been there, awaiting, anticipating her. That evening, I recognized my imperative to confront whatever presence inhabited the house. I could not sustain this existence, could not continue to feel like an inmate in my own abode. I was compelled to face it, irrespective of my profound terror. I deferred until twilight, until the dwelling was hushed, and then I descended to the cellar. The terror was nearly insuperable, but I compelled myself to persevere, one stride at a time. Upon reaching the foot of the steps, the chair was present, exactly as I had foreseen. It stood vacant, yet the atmosphere surrounding it felt electrified, as if an entity awaited. I drew a deep breath and moved nearer, my heart thumping against my ribs. The chair stayed immobile, the chamber silent, but I could perceive her presence, like a frigid exhalation, upon my nape. Then I addressed her. "Eleanor," I articulated, my voice quivering, "if you are here, I want you to understand that this is your dwelling. You are not obligated to depart, but I implore you, do not frighten me. I am merely attempting to reside here, just as you once did." For an instant, no event occurred. The chair remained static, the chamber hushed, yet I could sense her essence, like a chilling breath on the back of my cervical spine. I recoiled, my breathing faltering. The chair began to oscillate, its groaning filling the space. But this time, it lacked menace. It felt tranquil. The room became colder, the air growing denser with the aroma of aged perfume, and I knew she was present. However, this time, I felt no fear. I observed the chair sway for several minutes, my apprehension gradually receding. Then, as abruptly as it began, the rocking ceased. The cellar fell silent, and a profound sense of serenity enveloped me. In that instant, I apprehended that Eleanor had attained tranquility. The subsequent day, I relocated the chair from the cellar to the sitting room, positioning it near the window, where it could receive sunlight. I never again witnessed the aged female, yet occasionally, when the dwelling is hushed and the breeze is calm, I perceive the subtle sound of the chair groaning, swaying to and fro, and I know that Eleanor persists there, safeguarding her abode, precisely as she always has.
Story 4. The Hidden Resident. Upon my initial acquisition of the house, I was overcome with immense pride and enthusiasm. It marked my inaugural home purchase, a modest property that had been available on the market for some time. It necessitated certain improvements, nothing overly substantial, merely minor repairs, and a new application of paint. However, this did not concern me. I was prepared to personalize it, to transform it into a dwelling that truly reflected me. The house encapsulated everything I had sought. It possessed distinctive traits, a rich background, and ample room for all the possessions I had accumulated over the years. The preceding proprietors had bequeathed some furnishings, vintage items that enhanced the abode's aged allure. Additionally, there was an attic, which I intended to utilize for safekeeping once I had sorted through all the cartons I had brought along. The initial days were a tempest of unboxing and arrangement. I dedicated the majority of my hours to the lower floor, establishing the kitchen and sitting room, and only dared to ascend to the loft to deposit containers of items I wouldn't immediately require. The attic presented as a vast dust-laden expanse, featuring exposed rafters and a solitary diminutive window that permitted just enough daylight for visibility. It was strewn with antiquated furnishings, artworks, and miscellaneous articles that the former occupants had neglected to remove. Initially, I gave it little thought. The attic was simply another component of the dwelling, and I was too engrossed in ordering everything else to dwell on it. However, this altered on the third evening. It commenced with an auditory disturbance. I lay in bed, endeavoring to achieve slumber, when I perceived it, a subtle scraping noise originating from the floor above. It was so hushed that I initially believed it to be a product of my imagination, merely the breeze playing tricks on my senses. Yet the more I concentrated, the more pronounced and definite it became. It emanated from the loft. I sat upright in bed, my heart beginning to accelerate. I rationalized that it was likely merely a rodent, or some other small creature that had found entry. Venerable houses such as this were prone to infestations, and I hadn't yet had the opportunity to inspect the attic comprehensively. Nevertheless, there was an attribute to the sound that made my flesh creep, something that felt amiss. I attempted to dismiss it, to persuade myself it was inconsequential. Yet the sound persisted, relentless and unyielding. I recognized that slumber would elude me unless I investigated. Thus, with reluctance, I rose from bed and procured a flashlight. The dwelling was unnervingly hushed as I proceeded toward the attic staircase, the sole sound being the groan of the floorboards beneath my weight. Upon reaching the portal, I paused, my hands suspended above the door. A part of me yearned to reverse course, to return to my bed and feign ignorance of any sound, but I knew I was unable to. I unlatched the door, and the scraping sound intensified, reverberating down the step. My heart was throbbing in my chest as I ascended the confined staircase, the beam of my flashlight piercing the obscurity. Upon gaining the summit, I directed the light throughout the attic, seeking the origin of the disturbance. But the scraping persisted. I trailed the sound, navigating my path through the labyrinth of cartons and furnishings, until I reached the attic's furthest recess. There, concealed behind a pile of aged artworks, was a diminutive wooden portal I had not previously observed. The portal was antiquated, its timber distorted and fractured, appearing untouched for ages. The scraping noise originated from behind it, subtle yet resolute, as if an entity sought egress. I extended my hand toward the doorknob, my fingers quivering, and slowly rotated it. The door groaned open, disclosing a dark, constricted passage that terminated in a small concealed chamber. My flashlight wavered, its beam projecting elongated specters across the flooring as I entered. The chamber was confined, barely affording standing room, its walls adorned with aged, discolored wallpaper. The air was dense and fetid,
the aroma almost suffocating. In the center of the room rested a lone, diminutive cot, its bedding tattered and marred by time. Yet what truly seized my attention was the form seated upon the bed. It was a female, her complexion pallid and unhealthy, her hair tangled and disheveled. She was hunched, her back to me, actively scraping at the partition, her fingers gouging into the plaster. My respiration faltered, and a surge of nausea overwhelmed me. This was no mere creature, no product of my mental fabrication. This was actual. I yearned to flee, yet I found myself incapable of averting my gaze from the entity before me. Then she rotated. Her eyes were frenzied, imbued with a derangement that sent a shock of dread through my being. Her visage was emaciated, her cheekbones sunken, and her lips were chapped and parched. Her eyes were expansive, unblinking, and permeated with a desperation that chilled my very essence. She stared at me for an instant, her chest laboring as if she struggled for air, and then, without any prior indication, she lunged toward me. I recoiled, barely evading her as she clawed at the void, her digits contorted and knotted. She was shrieking, a piercing, non-human sound that reverberated through the loft, suffusing the area with an impression of sheer, unrestrained horror. I pivoted and fled, my heart thumping against my ribs as I rushed down the stairs, her outcry still resounding in my auditory canals. I did not halt until I reached the main entrance, my hands trembling as I clumsily manipulated the lock. When I finally succeeded in opening the door, I bolted outside, the frigid night air striking me like a sharp blow to the face. I continued my flight until I was midway down the thoroughfare, my breath coming in ragged, desperate inhalations, my intellect churning with the recent spectacle. I did not re-enter the dwelling that night. I was simply incapable. Instead, I remained in my vehicle, gazing at the house, endeavoring to comprehend the preceding events. The female in the loft. Who was she? How extended had her presence been? And why had I not discerned the concealed chamber earlier?